The crystal chandelier above the dining table at the Gilded Oak shimmered with a brilliance that felt almost mocking. It was my 65th birthday, a milestone that society often equates with the beginning of the end, a slow fade into obsolescence. The room was filled with people, friends, former business associates, and extended family. But the air felt thin, suffocating. I sat at the head of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the way they moved. It is strange how you can be the reason for a gathering and yet feel like the furniture. My daughter, Lydia, was trying her best. She adjusted my collar, her smile tight, her eyes darting nervously toward her husband, Henderson. I could see the tension in her shoulders. She wanted peace. She wanted a perfect evening. But peace is a currency that requires everyone to pay their share, and I knew Henderson had arrived with empty pockets. As I looked around the room, I felt a familiar heaviness in my chest. If you are listening to this story, and you have ever felt like you were screaming underwater, or that your presence was being tolerated rather than celebrated, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who understands that feeling. It helps more than you know. And while you are at it, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. I always find comfort in knowing we are all connected by these shared experiences. And if you want to hear more truth, subscribe. Henderson was holding court at the other end of the table. He was 35, sharp-jawed, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He was laughing, a loud barking sound that demanded attention. He ran a tech logistics firm, Velocity, which he claimed was revolutionizing the industry I had spent 40 years building. To him, I was a dinosaur. To him, my methods were archaic and my time was up. There is a specific kind of pain in being dismissed by those who are reaping the fruits of trees you planted. It makes you question not just your worth, but the very foundation of respect within a family. The gifts were being presented. This is usually a moment of gratitude, a physical manifestation of affection. But in circles like ours, gifts are often political statements. Lydia gave me a beautiful, leather-bound journal, knowing I had planned to write my memoirs. It was thoughtful, personal. I squeezed her hand, trying to convey that her love was the only thing anchoring me to the room. Then it was Henderson's turn. He stood up, commanding the room's silence with a raised hand. He signaled to a waiter, who brought over a large, awkwardly shaped box wrapped in shiny silver paper. The smirk on Henderson's face was the first warning. He didn't look at me with warmth. He looked at me like a prop in his own comedy special. "For Matteo," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. Because we all know that at this age, stability is the most important thing. I unwrapped it slowly. My hands were steady, though my heart rate had spiked. Inside the box was a high-tech medical-grade walking frame. A walker. I didn't need a walker. I hiked 5 miles every Sunday. I played tennis. The room went dead silent. The insult was so precise, so public. It wasn't just a bad joke. It was an erasure of my vitality. It is a dangerous thing to strip a man of his dignity in front of his peers. It assumes that he has no power left to strike back. Henderson didn't stop there. He mistook the silence for anticipation, or perhaps he just didn't care. He raised his wine glass, the liquid swirling like blood in the light. He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of triumph. "To Matteo," he began. "On my birthday, my son-in-law mocked me. Wish for a retirement home, old man." Everyone applauded. I smiled politely. Then I bought his company for $15 million and fired him. He fainted from the shock. Wait. No, that is the end of the story. But in that moment, the first part of that sentence rang out like a gunshot. He actually said it. Wish for a retirement home, old man. Somewhere they can spoon-feed you your applesauce. A few of his sycophants chuckled nervously, driven by the instinct to side with the loudest voice in the room. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I looked at Henderson. I didn't frown, I didn't shout. I forced the corners of my mouth upward into a polite, frozen smile. I nodded, acknowledging the toast as if it were a compliment. Inside, however, something shifted. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and burns out quickly. This was cold. This was the icy clarity of a judge passing a sentence. When you disrespect an elder, you aren't just insulting a person. You are insulting history, experience, and the very path that allowed you to stand where you are. He thought I was finished. He had no idea he had just started the clock on his own demise. The rest of the evening blurred into a wash of gray noise. I went through the motions, cutting the cake, shaking hands, accepting hollow well wishes. Lydia tried to pull me aside near the coat check as the night wound down. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. He's just stressed. The market is volatile right now. He didn't mean it. I looked at my daughter, a woman I had raised to be strong, now making excuses for a man who treated humiliation as a sport. "It's fine, Lydia," I lied, smoothing her hair. "It's just a joke. I'm an old man, right? I should be able to take a joke." "It wasn't funny," she said, looking down. "No," I agreed softly. "It wasn't." I drove home alone. The city lights of Austin streaked past my window. I turned off the radio. I needed silence to think. I had retired 3 years ago, sold my logistics fleet, and stepped back to enjoy the quiet life. I had assumed my legacy was safe. I had assumed my family was secure. But seeing Henderson tonight, seeing the arrogance that masked a deep insecurity, I realized I had been negligent. Negligence in a family is just as damaging as negligence in business. I had let a wolf sleep at the foot of my daughter's bed. And tonight, the wolf had bitten me. The next morning, I didn't go to the golf course. I went to my study. I unlocked the safe and took out a laptop I hadn't used for business in years. Old habits don't die, they just hibernate. I started digging. Not into Henderson's personal life, I didn't care about his hobbies, but into velocity. On the surface, his company looked pristine. Flashy website, buzzwords about AI integration, shiny headquarters downtown. But I know logistics. I know that shipping is a game of margins, not marketing. I began to pull public records, credit reports, and supplier reviews. What I found was a house of cards. He was leveraging debt to pay off previous debt. He was expanding into territories he didn't understand, burning cash on branding while his fleet maintenance was suffering. It's a tragedy when ego drives the wheel. It always drives the car off the cliff. If you have ever felt the gut-wrenching realization that someone you trusted was living a lie, or if you have ever been the one to see the cracks before the wall fell, you know how heavy that knowledge is. It's a burden. Please, hit that subscribe button right now. Do it for the people who pay attention to the details when everyone else is looking at the shiny distractions. We need to stick together. 2 weeks later, Henderson showed up at my house. He didn't call first. He just rolled up in his sports car, the engine growling unnecessarily loud in my quiet driveway. I watched him from the window. He checked his reflection in the side mirror before walking to the door. He came in with a forced casualness, tossing his keys on the foyer table. "Mateo, good to see you. Look, I felt bad about the birthday thing. Just a bit of ribbing, you know, Locker room talk. "I understand, Henderson," I said, pouring him a coffee he hadn't asked for. "What brings you by?" He took a sip and grimaced. "Business, actually. I have this incredible opportunity. We're looking to acquire a smaller regional carrier. It would double our capacity, but liquidity is a bit tight with the quarterly tax cycle. I wanted to give you the chance to buy in. A bridge loan. High interest in your favor, of course." He framed it as a favor to me. He was offering me the privilege of lending him money. It is fascinating how desperate men wrap their needs in the packaging of generosity. He wasn't offering me an investment. He was asking for a lifeline, but his pride wouldn't let him say the word help. I sat back in my leather armchair, steepling my fingers. "How much, Henderson?" "2 million, he said quickly. "Just for 6 months." I knew for a fact, based on my research, that he didn't need it for an acquisition. He needed it to make payroll. He was bleeding. "No," I said simply. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "No, I don't think it's a wise investment. Your debt-to-equity ratio is upside down, Henderson, and your operational costs are bloated." His face darkened. The mask of the friendly son-in-law slipped. "You checked my books? You have no right. My company is the future. Your way of doing things, paper logs and handshakes, is dead. You're turning down a guarantee because your feelings are hurt about a walker?" "It's not about the walker," I said calmly. "It's about competence and respect." He stood up, slamming the coffee cup down. "You're a bitter old man, Mateo. You're sitting on a pile of cash, rotting away, while I'm out there building an empire. Keep your money. I don't need it. I'll find it somewhere else." He stormed out, but the damage was done. The rejection had cracked his composure. I watched him leave, feeling no triumph, only a deep sense of foreboding. A man like Henderson, when cornered, becomes dangerous. He doesn't learn, he doubles down. 3 days later, I met Lydia for lunch. She looked exhausted. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. She claimed she was getting it cleaned, but she rubbed the empty spot on her finger constantly. "Is everything okay with the house?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then looked away. "Henderson." He refinanced. He said we needed the equity for the business. He said it was a sure thing, but Dad, that house was supposed to be our safety net. My blood ran cold. He was gambling with my daughter's shelter. Financial infidelity is a betrayal as sharp as a knife. It says, "I value my ambition more than our security." It broke my heart to see her so fragile, trusting a man who was using her trust as collateral. I realized then that simply refusing to help him wasn't enough. I had to stop him. I called an old contact, Jonas. Jonas was a forensic accountant who could find a missing penny in a federal budget. We met in a diner far from the city center, a place where the coffee was bitter and the booths were high. "I need you to look deeper into Velocity," I told him. "I need to know who holds the debt. I need to know the terms of his loans, and I need to know who is on his board of directors." Jonas nodded, taking notes on a yellow pad. "You planning a hostile takeover, Mateo?" "I'm planning an intervention," I corrected. "He's going to crash that company, Jonas. I need to be the one to catch the pieces before they hit my daughter." Knowledge is the only weapon that matters in a war like this. Henderson had bluster and youth, but I had patience and information. While he was out buying expensive dinners to impress investors, I was mapping out the architecture of his failure. Jonas worked fast. Within a week, the picture was clear. Henderson wasn't just struggling, he was drowning. He had alienated his senior staff. His turnover rate was 40%. He was treating his employees the way he treated me, with disdain. A company is an organism. If you poison the head, the body dies. I read reports of him screaming at warehouse managers, cutting benefits to pay for office renovations. It was a classic case of a leader who loved the title of CEO, but hated the responsibility of leadership. I felt a strange mix of anger and pity. He had been given every advantage, every opportunity, and he was squandering it because he couldn't conquer his own ego. It is a moral failing to hold power over others and use it only to serve yourself. The strategy formed in my mind. I couldn't approach the board as Mateo. They knew me as Henderson's father-in-law. They would see it as a family squabble. I needed to be an entity. I activated a shell corporation I had maintained for years, Aurora Holdings. It was faceless, efficient, and flush with cash. Through Aurora, I reached out to the primary venture capital firm backing Henderson. They were nervous. They had seen the numbers too. I made an offer to buy out their position. They were eager to listen. To them, Henderson was a liability. To Aurora Holdings, he was a target. Operating from the shadows is not about deceit. It is about removing the emotional noise so that business can be done. I needed them to see the money, not the man. Word got back to Henderson that a mystery investor was circling. I heard it through Lydia. She told me Henderson was manic, swinging between euphoria and panic. He thinks they're going to save him, she told me over the phone. He says this Aurora group is going to inject capital and let him expand to Europe. Is that what he thinks? I asked, keeping my voice even. Yes. He's already spending the money in his head, Dad. He's talking about buying a boat. The desperation was palpable. When a man is drowning, he will grab onto a sword if he thinks it will keep him afloat. He didn't realize that Aurora wasn't a life raft. It was a net. And I was the one holding the rope. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Lydia came to my house in the middle of the day. She was crying. Henderson had yelled at her, blamed her for his stress, told her she was unsupportive because she questioned the second mortgage. Seeing my daughter cry changed everything. Up until then, it was business. It was a lesson. Now, it was a rescue mission. A parent's duty does not end when the child leaves home. It evolves. You become the safety net of last resort. He called me stupid, Dad, she sobbed. He said I don't understand vision. I held her, feeling the rage solidify into a cold, hard diamond in my chest. You are not stupid, Lydia. You are kind. And kindness is a form of intelligence he will never understand. Go stay in the guest room. Rest. I went to my desk. I picked up the phone. Jonas, execute the buy orders. Get the board on a call. We move today. The deal was structured quickly. The board of Velocity was tired of Henderson's volatility. When Aurora Holdings offered $15 million for a controlling interest, enough to pay off the debts and give the investors a modest exit, they jumped. The catch? The buyer demanded full operational control and the immediate restructuring of the executive team. The board agreed. They didn't care about Henderson. They cared about their return. I sat in my study, signing the digital documents. $15 million. A significant sum, but a fair price to reclaim my family's dignity. It wasn't about vengeance, I told myself. It was about correction. But as I signed the final page, I admitted to myself, it was a little bit about vengeance, and perhaps that is okay. Justice sometimes requires a heavy hand. Henderson was summoned to a board meeting on Friday. He thought he was going there to sign the partnership agreement with Aurora. He thought he was about to be crowned king. Lydia told me he had bought a new suit for the occasion. He had practiced his speech in the mirror. He was going to demand a raise, a bonus, and a seat on the Aurora board. The delusion was total. He walked into that trap with his chest puffed out, blind to the reality that he was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. It is a profound lesson in humility. Never assume you are the smartest person in the room, especially when you haven't checked who locked the door. I arrived at the Velocity headquarters 30 minutes after the meeting started. I walked past the reception desk. The young woman there tried to stop me. "Sir, you can't go in there. The board is in session." "I know," I said, not slowing down. "I own the session." I walked down the hallway. The same hallway Henderson had likely strutted down an hour ago. The walls were glass. I could see the employees working, heads down, stressed. They looked tired. They needed a leader, not a tyrant. I reached the double doors of the boardroom. I paused for a second. I adjusted my tie. I wasn't Mateo, the retiree. I wasn't the old man with the walker. I was the CEO of Aurora Holdings. I pushed the doors open. The room went silent. Henderson was standing at the head of the table, mid-sentence. He froze. The board members looked at me, then back at Henderson. They knew. He didn't. "Mateo?" Henderson laughed, a nervous, confused sound. "What are you doing here? Did you get lost looking for the restroom? This is a closed meeting." He looked at the chairman. "Get him out of here." The chairman didn't move. He looked down at his papers. "Actually," I said, my voice filling the room without shouting, "I believe I have the floor." I walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, the investor's chair. I sat down. Henderson's face went pale. He looked from the board members to me, the realization creeping in like a slow poison. "You?" he whispered. "Aurora?" "Me," I confirmed. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the mahogany table. I looked him dead in the eye. "Henderson," I said softly, "at my birthday, my son-in-law laughed at me. Days later, I bought his company." I let the words hang there. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "You called me obsolete," I continued. "You mocked my age. You mocked my legacy. You thought that because I was quiet, I was weak. But you forgot the first rule of logistics, Henderson. Never underestimate the supply chain. I supplied the money that built this table you're standing at." "You can't do this," he stammered. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "I'm the founder. I'm the visionary." "You are a liability," I said. "I have reviewed the books. You are leveraged to the hilt. You have demoralized your staff, and you have jeopardized my daughter's financial future." I opened the folder in front of me. "As the majority shareholder of Velocity, effective immediately, I am removing you as CEO. You are fired, Henderson. Security is waiting to escort you out." He looked around the room for support. "Guys, tell him you need me." The board members refused to meet his gaze. He was alone. The color drained from his face completely. His knees buckled. It wasn't a theatrical fall. It was a physical system failure. He fainted from the shock. He slumped against the whiteboard, sliding down to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and shattered ego. Reality, when it finally hits harder than anything else. We didn't call an ambulance immediately. We just gave him some water. He came to a minute later, groggy and defeated. He was escorted out of the building in silence. He didn't shout. He was too broken. In the weeks that followed, I stepped in as interim CEO. I stabilized the company. I promoted the operations manager, a brilliant woman Henderson had ignored for years, to run the day-to-day. I restructured the debt. The company survived. Lydia filed for divorce. It was painful, but she realized she had been married to a mirror, not a man. She moved back into her own apartment, free of his debts and his darkness. I kept the walker he gave me. It sits in the corner of my office at Velocity. It serves as a reminder, not of my age, but of the mistake he made. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever been mocked by someone who hasn't earned half of what you have built, I want you to subscribe to this channel. Do not do it for me. Do it as a promise to yourself that you will never let anyone define your worth. Karma has a schedule, but sometimes you have to drive the bus yourself. Henderson wished for a retirement home for me. In the end, I retired him, and I have never slept better.